The clock struck midnight at Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Thomas Whitfield completed his final security rounds. 23 years of loyal service to the Crown had taught him to notice even the smallest details that seemed out of place. Tonight, something felt different in the royal residence. Thomas had been assigned to the night watch for Queen Camilla's private quarters following recent security concerns. The Queen Consort had been receiving anonymous letters threatening to expose royal secrets that would shake the monarchy to its core. Scotland Yard had advised enhanced security measures, though they couldn't determine if the threats were credible. As Thomas walked through the ornate corridors lined with centuries-old paintings, his trained ear caught an unusual sound coming from the direction of the Queen's private wardrobe room. It was a soft, scratching noise, almost like someone carefully picking at a lock. His hand instinctively moved to his radio, but something made him pause. The wardrobe room was supposedly secure, accessible only to the Queen herself and her most trusted lady-in-waiting, Margaret Thornberry. Margaret had served the royal family for over 30 years and was beyond reproach. Yet the sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate. Thomas approached the heavy oak door with centuries of royal history embedded in its grain. The scratching had stopped, replaced by what sounded like wooden panels being carefully moved. His heart raced as he realized someone was definitely inside the room, and it wasn't supposed to be anyone at this hour. Protocol demanded he call for backup immediately. Any breach of royal security was to be treated as a potential assassination attempt or theft of priceless artifacts. But something about the careful, almost reverent nature of the sounds made Thomas hesitate. This didn't sound like a burglar or someone with malicious intent. He pressed his ear closer to the door. Now he could hear what sounded like fabric being gently rustled, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Then came a woman's voice, barely audible, speaking in hushed, excited tones. Thomas couldn't make out the words, but the voice sounded familiar. The security cameras in this particular corridor had been temporarily disabled for maintenance, something that now seemed suspiciously convenient. Thomas realized he would have to make a decision based solely on his instincts and experience. Drawing upon his military training, Thomas positioned himself beside the door and listened more carefully. The voice was definitely female, middle-aged, and speaking with the refined accent typical of palace staff. More importantly, whoever was inside seemed to know exactly what they were looking for. "My God," came the whispered voice from within, clearer now. "After all these years, here it is." Thomas recognized the voice. It belonged to Margaret Thornberry, the Queen's lady-in-waiting. But what was she doing in the wardrobe room at midnight? And why was she speaking as if she had discovered something extraordinary? His duty was clear. Even if it was Margaret, she had no authorization to be in the Queen's private quarters at this hour without permission. Royal protocol was absolute, regardless of rank or years of service. Thomas raised his hand to knock on the door and announce his presence. But then he heard something that made him freeze. Margaret's voice carried through the door with unmistakable emotion as she spoke to someone else, though Thomas had heard no one enter with her. "Elizabeth would have wanted this to come to light," Margaret whispered. "She made me promise to tell the truth when the time was right. I think that time is now. Elizabeth." She was speaking about Queen Elizabeth II, who had passed away over 2 years ago. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. What truth was Margaret referring to? What had the late Queen asked her to reveal? The rustling of fabric grew more pronounced, followed by the sound of what seemed like heavy material being carefully unfolded. Margaret's breathing had become rapid and excited, punctuated by small gasps of amazement. "The embroidery is exactly as she described," Margaret continued in her whispered monologue. "Every pearl, every thread of gold, preserved perfectly. Charles never knew. Camilla never knew. No one knew except Elizabeth and myself." Thomas felt as though he was standing at the threshold of a royal mystery that had been hidden for decades. His security training told him to intervene immediately, but his curiosity about what Margaret had discovered was overwhelming. What was this mysterious item that had been kept secret even from the current king and queen? The sounds from within the room shifted again. Now Thomas could hear what sounded like photographs being shuffled, followed by the crinkle of old paper. Margaret was apparently examining documents along with whatever garment she had found. "The proof is all here," she whispered with growing excitement. "The receipts, the correspondence, even the photographs from that day. History will need to be rewritten." Thomas checked his watch. His relief wouldn't arrive for another 6 hours, and the corridor would remain empty until dawn. Whatever secret Margaret had uncovered in the Queen's wardrobe, she clearly believed it was significant enough to risk her position and possibly criminal charges for unauthorized access. The moral dilemma weighed heavily on Thomas. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family and their privacy, but he had also sworn to uphold security protocols without exception. Margaret's discoveries seemed to relate to historical events involving the late Queen Elizabeth II, but the current Queen Camilla's privacy was being violated in the process. As he stood frozen in indecision, the door handle began to turn slowly from the inside. Margaret was preparing to leave, and Thomas would have to make his choice immediately. He could step back and pretend he had seen nothing, potentially allowing a serious security breach to go unreported. Or he could confront Margaret and demand an explanation, possibly uncovering a royal secret that was meant to remain buried. The door opened a crack, and Thomas could see a sliver of light from inside the wardrobe room. Margaret's shadow was visible as she moved about, carefully replacing items in their original positions. But she was taking something with her, something bundled carefully in what appeared to be protective cloth. Thomas made his decision. He stepped directly in front of the door, just as Margaret attempted to exit, startling her so badly that she nearly dropped her mysterious bundle. "Mrs. Thornberry," Thomas said in his most official tone, "I need to ask what you're doing in the Queen's private wardrobe at this hour." Margaret's face went pale in the dim corridor lighting. For a moment, she looked like she might faint from the shock of being discovered. Then her expression shifted to one of determination, mixed with relief. "Sergeant Whitfield," she said quietly, clutching the bundle to her chest. "I've been waiting over 20 years for someone to discover me. Perhaps it's finally time the truth came out." Thomas stared at Margaret in the dim corridor, his mind racing with possibilities. The elderly lady-in-waiting stood before him, holding what appeared to be an ornate garment wrapped in protective silk, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Mrs. Thornberry, you need to explain yourself immediately," Thomas said, though his tone was gentler than protocol demanded. "This is a serious security breach." Margaret looked down the empty corridor, then back at Thomas. "Sergeant, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I have proof." She gestured to the bundle in her arms. "This is Queen Elizabeth II's original coronation dress from 1953. Thomas frowned. "That's impossible. The Queen's coronation gown is on display at Buckingham Palace for special exhibitions. I've seen it myself during state occasions." A sad smile crossed Margaret's weathered face. "That gown is a replica created in 1954. This," she held the bundle closer, "is the real dress, and it holds secrets that could change how the world views the late Queen's reign." Against his better judgment, Thomas found himself drawn into Margaret's story. "What do you mean, secrets?" Margaret glanced around nervously. "Can we speak in my quarters? This conversation cannot happen in open corridors. What I have to show you is too important to risk anyone overhearing." Thomas knew he should report this immediately to his superiors, but something in Margaret's demeanor convinced him that she truly believed what she was saying. His curiosity overcame his training as he nodded and followed her to her private rooms in the staff quarters. Margaret's apartment was modest but elegant, filled with photographs spanning decades of royal service. She carefully placed the mysterious bundle on her dining table and began to unwrap it with the reverence of someone handling a priceless artifact. As the silk fell away, Thomas gasped. Before him lay the most exquisite gown he had ever seen. The fabric seemed to shimmer even in the soft lamplight, covered with intricate embroidery, thousands of pearls, and gold threading that created patterns of unimaginable complexity. "Dear God," Thomas whispered, "if this isn't the coronation dress, what is it?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "This is indeed Queen Elizabeth's coronation dress, but it's not the one she wore during the public ceremony. This is the gown she wore during her private coronation, which took place 3 days before the official ceremony." Thomas felt his world shift slightly. "Private coronation? That's impossible. The coronation was the most documented event in British history. Millions watched it on television." "Precisely," Margaret said, pulling out a small wooden box from beneath the dress. "Which is why no one questioned what they saw. But Queen Elizabeth was actually crowned in a secret ceremony on June 2, 1953, with only 12 witnesses present, including myself as a young assistant to the Archbishop of Canterbury." She opened the wooden box, revealing faded photographs, official documents with royal seals, and what appeared to be correspondence in the Queen's own handwriting. Thomas picked up one of the photographs and studied it carefully. The black and white image showed a young Elizabeth II in the dress before him, surrounded by individuals he didn't recognize. She was wearing the imperial state crown and holding the same ceremonial orb and scepter used in the public coronation, but the setting appeared to be a private chapel rather than Westminster Abbey. "Why?" Thomas asked, still struggling to process what he was seeing. "Why would there be a secret coronation?" Margaret sat down heavily, as if the weight of keeping this secret for 70 years had finally become too much to bear. The official coronation nearly didn't happen. 3 days before the ceremony, the Queen received intelligence that there was a plot to assassinate her during the public event. The details were kept from the public, but the threat was real and immediate. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the seal of MI5. Thomas recognized it as a classified intelligence report, though the specific details were beyond his security clearance to understand fully. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the Prime Minister, and the Queen's closest advisors made an unprecedented decision, Margaret continued. They would proceed with a private coronation to ensure the continuity of the monarchy, while also moving forward with the public ceremony once the security threat was neutralized. Thomas examined more of the photographs. In each one, the same 12 individuals surrounded the young queen. He noticed that several were wearing ceremonial military uniforms he didn't recognize. "Who were the witnesses?" he asked. 6 were members of the royal family, including the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret. The others were high-ranking government officials and military leaders who took an oath of absolute secrecy. I was sworn to silence for the rest of my life. Margaret pulled out what appeared to be an official document written in ornate calligraphy. "This is the actual record of Elizabeth's coronation as queen. The date is June 2, 1953, not June 6 as history records." Thomas studied the document carefully. The signatures were impressive. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Winston Churchill, and Elizabeth herself, among others he recognized as major historical figures. "If this is true," Thomas said slowly, "then why reveal it now? Queen Elizabeth is gone, and the secret died with most of these people." Margaret's expression grew sad but resolute. "Because the Queen made me promise something before she died. She told me that if Charles ever remarried and if his new wife ever became Queen Consort, I was to reveal this secret to ensure historical accuracy." "What does this have to do with Queen Camilla?" Margaret carefully lifted a corner of the dress, revealing a hidden pocket sewn into the inner lining. From it, she withdrew a sealed letter bearing Queen Elizabeth's personal seal. The Queen left specific instructions. She believed that the British people deserved to know the complete truth about her reign, but only after the monarchy had successfully transitioned to the next generation. With Charles now king and Camilla as queen consort, she felt the time had come for historical honesty. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the implications. But why was this dress hidden in Queen Camilla's wardrobe? How did it get there? I placed it there myself 3 months ago, Margaret admitted. The Queen's instructions were specific. The dress and documents were to be hidden where the current queen consort would eventually discover them naturally. Elizabeth believed that Camilla, as the new queen, had the right to know the complete history of the role she was inheriting. Margaret pulled out one final document from the box. This is a letter written by Queen Elizabeth specifically to Queen Camilla, explaining everything and asking her to decide whether this secret should become public knowledge. Thomas read over Margaret's shoulder as she unfolded the letter. Queen Elizabeth's elegant handwriting filled the page with explanations about the security threats, the decision to hold a private coronation, and her hopes that future generations would understand the difficult choices she had been forced to make. The letter concluded with a direct request to Camilla to use her judgment about whether the British people were ready to learn that their beloved queen had actually been crowned in secret, and that the coronation they had celebrated was, while legitimate, not the moment she had actually assumed the throne. "This is incredible," Thomas murmured. "But why break into the wardrobe tonight? Why not simply present this to Queen Camilla directly?" Margaret's face showed signs of internal struggle. "Because I received word today that the anonymous letters threatening to expose royal secrets weren't random threats. Someone else knows about this secret, and they're planning to reveal it in a way that could damage the monarchy. I needed to retrieve the evidence before it could be used against the royal family." Thomas felt a chill of realization. The security threats against Queen Camilla weren't about future dangers. They were about historical secrets that could reshape public perception of the entire royal institution. "Who else knows?" he asked urgently. Margaret shook her head. "I'm not certain, but I believe it might be someone from within the palace itself, someone who has access to historical records and old correspondence. The threatening letters referenced specific details that only a few people would know." As if summoned by their conversation, Thomas's radio crackled to life with an urgent message from palace security. An intruder had been detected in the royal archives, and all security personnel were being called to respond immediately. Thomas and Margaret exchanged worried glances. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Someone was indeed searching for the same secrets that Margaret had been protecting for 7 decades. Thomas grabbed his radio as alarm bells began ringing throughout Buckingham Palace. The intruder alert meant all security protocols were now in effect, and the palace would be locked down within minutes. "Margaret, we need to secure these documents immediately," Thomas said urgently. "If someone else is searching for this information, they cannot be allowed to find it first." Margaret quickly began rewrapping the coronation dress, while Thomas examined the threatening letters she had mentioned. The handwriting was disguised, but certain phrases stood out as unusually specific. "Listen to this," Thomas read aloud. "The truth about June 1953 will be revealed unless the Crown acknowledges its deception. This person definitely knows about the secret coronation." Before Margaret could respond, Thomas's radio burst with chatter from the security team pursuing the intruder in the royal archives. The voice of his colleague, Officer Davies, came through clearly. "Subject is a female, approximately 60 years old, accessing historical documents from the 1950s. She appears to know exactly where to look." Thomas and Margaret exchanged alarmed glances. Someone was indeed searching for evidence of the secret coronation, and they had managed to breach one of the most secure areas of the palace. "I need to respond to this alert," Thomas told Margaret. "But first, I need to know who else might have known about Queen Elizabeth's instructions to you. Margaret thought carefully. Only 3 people knew the complete story: myself, the Queen, and her private secretary, Sir Geoffrey Hartwell. But Geoffrey died 2 years ago, just months before the Queen herself. What about Geoffrey's records? His files? He was meticulous about documentation, but the Queen made him promise to destroy all evidence when she passed away. However, Margaret paused, her expression growing worried. Geoffrey had a research assistant for the last 10 years of his life, a young woman named Victoria Ashford, who helped him organize historical documents. Thomas felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Could Victoria have discovered the secret while working with Geoffrey's files? It's possible. She had access to correspondence dating back decades. If Geoffrey hadn't been thorough in destroying everything, Victoria might have found references to the private coronation. Thomas's radio crackled again, with an update from the archives. The intruder had been cornered but was refusing to surrender peacefully. She was demanding to speak with Queen Camilla directly and claiming to have information vital to the monarchy's survival. "That has to be Victoria," Margaret said with certainty. "She's trying to force a revelation of the secret on her own terms." Thomas made a decision that would define his career. Instead of joining the pursuit in the archives, he chose to stay with Margaret and protect the evidence they had discovered. "We're going directly to Queen Camilla," he announced. "This situation requires royal intervention." Margaret's eyes widened. "Thomas, the Queen is asleep. Palace protocol forbids disturbing the royal family except in cases of immediate physical danger." "This is immediate danger," Thomas replied firmly. "If Victoria Ashford reveals this secret without context or explanation, it could damage the monarchy irreparably. Queen Camilla needs to know what she's dealing with." Together, they made their way through the palace corridors toward the royal quarters. Thomas used his security clearance to bypass several checkpoints, while Margaret carried the precious bundle containing Queen Elizabeth's secret coronation dress. When they reached the Queen's private apartments, Thomas hesitated. What he was about to do violated numerous protocols and could end his career immediately. But the threatening letters, the break-in at the archives, and the discovery of the secret coronation had created circumstances that no security manual had anticipated. Thomas knocked firmly on the Queen's private door. Within moments, the door opened to reveal Queen Camilla in her dressing gown, flanked by 2 additional security guards who had been stationed outside her quarters due to the palace lockdown. "Sergeant Whitfield," the Queen said with surprising calm. "This had better be extraordinarily important." "Your Majesty," Thomas began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "We have discovered the source of the recent security threats, and it involves information that Queen Elizabeth specifically intended for you to know." Queen Camilla's expression sharpened with interest. She gestured for them to enter her private sitting room, then dismissed the additional guards with a wave of her hand. "Margaret," the Queen said with obvious affection for her lady-in-waiting, "what is this about?" Margaret stepped forward and carefully placed the silk bundle on a nearby table. "Your Majesty, I have something that belonged to Queen Elizabeth, along with instructions she left specifically for you." As Margaret unwrapped the coronation dress, Queen Camilla gasped audibly. The magnificent gown seemed to glow in the soft lighting of the sitting room, its thousands of pearls and gold threads creating an almost magical effect. "This is extraordinary," the Queen whispered, "but I don't understand." "Elizabeth's coronation gown is displayed publicly during special occasions." Margaret then produced Queen Elizabeth's personal letter and handed it to Queen Camilla. "Your Majesty, this letter will explain everything. Queen Elizabeth wanted you to have complete knowledge of your role as Queen Consort, including the secrets that came with it." Thomas watched as Queen Camilla read the letter, her expressions changing from confusion to amazement to deep thoughtfulness. When she finished, she set the letter down gently and looked at both Thomas and Margaret. "So Elizabeth was actually crowned 3 days before the public ceremony," she said slowly. "The coronation the world remembers was essentially a ceremonial reenactment of what had already taken place in secret." "Yes, Your Majesty," Margaret confirmed. "And now someone else has discovered this secret and is threatening to reveal it in a way that could damage the monarchy." Just then, Thomas's radio provided an update from the archives. Victoria Ashford had been detained, but not before photographing several historical documents with her phone. The situation was escalating, and media outlets were already beginning to receive anonymous tips about explosive royal revelations. Queen Camilla stood and walked to her window, looking out over the palace grounds where dawn was beginning to break. When she turned back to face them, her expression was resolute. "Elizabeth was wise to leave this decision to me," she said thoughtfully. "The British people have the right to know their complete history, but not through threats and unauthorized revelations." She picked up her private phone and began dialing. "I'm calling the Prime Minister and the Archbishop of Canterbury. If this secret is going to be revealed, it will be done properly with dignity and with complete transparency." Thomas felt a mixture of relief and admiration as he watched Queen Camilla take control of the situation. Rather than trying to suppress the secret or deal with it quietly, she was choosing to bring it into the open on her own terms. "Your Majesty," Margaret said quietly, "Queen Elizabeth hoped you would make exactly this choice. She believed that honesty and transparency would strengthen the monarchy rather than weaken it." Over the following hours, as palace officials and government representatives arrived for emergency consultations, Thomas remained with Queen Camilla and Margaret, helping to document the complete story of Queen Elizabeth's secret coronation. By afternoon, Queen Camilla had made her decision. She would address the nation that evening, revealing the complete truth about Queen Elizabeth's coronation and explaining the security circumstances that had necessitated such unprecedented secrecy. The revelation, when it came, was met with fascination rather than scandal. The British public was moved by the story of their young queen facing assassination threats, but still fulfilling her duty to the crown. The secret coronation became a symbol of Elizabeth's dedication rather than evidence of deception. Victoria Ashford was released without charges after agreeing to cooperate with the official revelation and acknowledging that her threatening letters had been misguided attempts to force historical honesty. Thomas was commended for his handling of the situation, though he privately knew that his decision to wake Queen Camilla could have easily ended his career. Instead, his willingness to prioritize the monarchy's welfare over strict protocol had helped prevent a potential crisis. Margaret, finally free from the burden of carrying Queen Elizabeth's secret, was able to spend her remaining years sharing stories of the extraordinary events she had witnessed during her decades of royal service. The coronation dress itself was eventually displayed alongside the replica, with both gowns telling the complete story of one of the most remarkable days in British royal history. Queen Elizabeth's legacy was enhanced rather than tarnished by the revelation that she had faced danger with courage and had been crowned twice in service to her people. In the end, Queen Elizabeth's final gift to the monarchy was not just the secret she had kept, but the trust she had placed in future generations to handle that secret with wisdom and grace.